Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about some basic data analysis, and we're going to be going more in depth and just doing some basic things like visualizing data, profiling data, getting conclusions, because there's so many uses for data analysis now that it's basically in every industry, whether it be fashion, whether it be medicine. So it's pretty good to get a few basics, and we're going to be using Python, and I'll walk you through how you can get started with data analysis. We'll do a simple example, and we'll call it a day. So the first thing you can do is go to kaggle.com, and the link will be to the description in the description for that. But yeah, basically, you want to click code, new notebook. We'll be using Kaggle, and I'll be doing it with you guys so that you can see what's up. So just give it 1 second to load. So yeah, so we have our new notebook. You can name it whatever you want. I'll just name it data analysis introduction. Helix. Okay, cool. So you have all of these basic things, but the main thing we're going to be focused on is this import pandas as PD. So this will be in the language Python, which is a pretty common language for data analysis, if not the most common. And yeah, so it's good to know a few basic Python syntax, but otherwise we'll try to walk you through this. So the import numpy as np basically is just like giving a kind of, it says import this library, or so we can access it as this name so we can type it quicker basically. um so yeah, and then these are just some backend things. But before we even get looking into the code, we want to add our data because that's mainly what we're going to be working with. So we're going to be working with something called the PIMAS, or Indian diabetes. You can just search that, and then you should get the PMUD Indians diabetes data set. So you can add this, and then just give it 1 sec. And then, yeah. So let's start by running the cell to turn your draft session on, which is how you're going to run the code. Sorry, I'm click now. But yeah. Oh. Okay, so now the database is downloaded. And this is basically what we're going to use as the basis of our introduction. Okay, so as this is going, I guess we can just start off. So obviously we have this import pandas as PD. We'll put it again here, and also the data printed out here. But yeah, this is what you're going to need at the beginning of any kind of data project that you're going to do. So let's start off with the first basic function. The first basic function is called pd.read underscore csv. Okay, so you have this, and what this does basically is it and then you want to use diabetes.csv, or making sure you can just go here and then click the copy file path. Copy it. So there you go. So basically what this does is it reads whatever is in this file into something called a data frame, and you'll see more about what that is as we continue to visualize it. So right now we got no errors, so let's move on. So the first thing you want to do is we can just start by checking a little bit of the data. We just want to see, how it's looking, just some of the data. So this obviously is a lot prettier than what you'd see in, a normal Python console because it's in Kaggle. But as you can see here, we see the first four values, or the first four columns, or the first four rows of basically how the data is functioned. So you can see the different variables it has: pregnancy, glucose, blood pressure, skin thickness, insulin, BMI, blah, 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 age, outcome. So the outcome is the one that we're going to be looking at the most, because outcome is, do they have diabetes? Do they not have diabetes? So yeah, this just gets us a good sense of how the data is looking right now. So then we have to basically, so the first step as like a data analyst is we try to understand these variables and what they mean in the context so that we can, get a more in-depth look. But we can kind of skip past that for the tutorial's sake, because we want to make sure that you guys know what you're doing in Python. So the next pretty useful tool, which a lot of data analysts use, and it's not very common in such YouTube tutorials like this, is something called profiling. So if we go import this is the way you do profiling. So this is basically just another library, making sure I spelled profiling right. Yeah. So this is basically just another library, and you can call it Pandas Profiling. So basically, this is going to profile your data. So, and it'll make it easier to read. So you'll see what I mean. 1 second. So it's now right now what it's doing is it's looking through the data set and it's about to give you a huge summary of what the data set is, and we'll walk through that summary. Just give it 1 sec to look through the pretty large data set that we were provided. So yeah, in the meantime, basically this will generate kind of like a summary of your data, and then this is just making it fancy. But yeah, so now it should show up pretty soon. All right, here we go. Okay, so basically it kind of created somewhat of a web page about your data. Uh, and this is called the Pandas Profiling Report. So I guess we can start off with the overview. So you have your numeric data, which is basically if you took like basic math or statistics, you know that numeric data is things you can represent with numbers, things like that. Then you have your categorical data, which is more like non-representative with non-numeric values, and there's um, other like for instance in this case the one categorical variable would be the outcome because that's the one you're looking at. So yeah, you have 9 variables in total. The number of observations you have is 768, and then you can take a look more about the variables, and if they're numeric you'll see some kinds of distributions here, different mins and maxes. So in this case pregnancies, like the minimum is 0 pregnancies, maximum is 17 pregnancies. Then you have your mean, different statistics on each variable here. So then you can see some interactions. This I think is a very cool function, and this will be very useful. So we're about to go through like how you can manually, create interactions, but obviously it's a lot more complicated because like you have to, adjust it for parameters. It's very, very easy when you're looking through the Panda profiling. So let's say I wanted to measure the pregnancies to let's say I wanted to measure the interactions between age and glucose. I don't know. Those are 2 random ones. Obviously, like you can see, it's very scattered, and this is like how you can draw conclusions from data. And then there's something called the correlation map, which basically just, as you can see on this side, there's like a scale of how correlated each variable is to the other. So you have variables on both sides of the thing. So let's say like if you wanted to see what the most correlated is, outcome, obviously you can see this line here is like very correlated because it's literally like the same thing. So outcome is obviously 100% correlated to outcome because they're the same thing. Age is obviously 100% correlated to age, same thing. But if you look like a little more above, you can see that like let's say age is pretty correlated to pregnancies, as you can see here, which makes sense considering the older you get, you're probably having more pregnancies. And then this is just missing values. These are some samples, and just like so we looked at head. So that was the first 4 values. This is just the first 9 values. This is the bottom 9 values, I think. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what Panda Profiling does, and we'll look at more of a manual way to do that, but that's definitely a shortcut that you should know when you're looking at data analysis. Okay, so let's go into more visualization. So there's a few different libraries that can get this done, and the three that we'll look at is Matplotlib, Seaborn, and Plotly. So these are very big these are very big data analysis like visualization platforms. So basically, the first thing we want to do is start by importing some of these libraries. So first thing we want to do is import Matplotlib as PLT, because that's a shortcut, and then import Seaborn as SNS. Okay. Then after you're done with that, you go. These are just some basic. I'll type the code and then unpause the recording for a sec, just so that you guys don't need to sit here, and then we'll go over the code. Okay, so now we have some basic things right here. I'll run this quickly. Should not output much, but so we have some basic commands here that we'll start setting up our visualizations of the data, and how we're going to draw correlations, things like that. So um, the first function here is the Matplotlib, the pyplot, the import here, as we talked about, and then the same thing with the Seaborn, and then change that to SNS. So this color palette here is what we're going to be using to derive color throughout, and you'll see this as we keep going and starting to visualize the data. This right here is just saying that, hey, whenever you see Matplotlib, don't like create a new tab or anything. Like make sure it's in line. It's very similar to the parentheses or the percent matplot in line, if not the same. These are some plotly functions that we'll be using throughout, and I'll explain that more as we keep going. Yeah. So now we want to create a new code cell so that we can start actually visualizing it. Okay, so we basically just have this code, which is if we run it, there's a few different things that we'll talk about. So this is the pie chart, obviously. So you see here the one means diabetes. This means like no diabetes. So yeah, let's just go over the values. So the first thing is like it looks at so obviously like the way that we're going to be using this data is the outcome variable. So it's calling df outcome, which is how you call a variable, and then value counts to see how much is in each part. So like if it's 0, how many zeros are there, how many ones are there, and then yeah, it'll split that. And obviously if you hover over it, you can see 500 plus 268 as we determined for. There's 768 data points, so they're the same. These colors are literally just like the colors you see here. This trace here is basically these two basically are setting up the pie chart. This data equals trace is basically what is what the data is, and then it'll use that in later on to basically like plot out the figure here, and then figure.show shows basically its figure with all of the information that happened here. And these are just some adjustments of how it should look and the appearance. So yeah. And I'll leave you the Medium article link that we use. Okay, cool. So obviously you get this, and then yeah. So the next thing that's more useful is basically we can like visualize through a few ways. We'll just show the scatter plot today, but I think this is pretty good to set up, like future explorations of how you can visualize data. But I think the scatter plot is a good start. So let's set up the scatter plot. I'll pause again and then show my code and walk through it again. Okay, sounds good. So basically, here's the code, and so I guess we can just walk through it. So the first thing is we want to define a few things. So the px.scatter. So what is px? If we look back, px is the plotly.express, which is basically a function of plotly, and that contains a scatter function. So this tells the computer, the program, that hey, this is a scatter plot, and these are your parameters. The first parameter is the data frame in which we're calling the data from. So obviously it needs to find data from someplace. We say look in the data frame, that's where it'll be. X, as in the x-axis, is going to be the glucose variable. So obviously we want to check glucose and insulin. So this is going to be the glucose variable. The y is going to be the insulin variable. And then you have this, which is basically just updating how it's looking. And then this will just set the title. And, update layout sets the title as shown here, title text. And then you see glucose and insulin. Figure.show finally just shows the entire figure. So you can see here some correlation. There's some like data points here, and yeah. So again, this is a very simple like visualization. But if you want to look more, I recommend that you look into the Plotly and Matplotlib and Seaborn documentation to learn more. But again, I highly recommend that you get familiar with the profiling tool. I think this is the most, if you're going to take one thing away, I think it's just how to do this profiling, because profiling saves so much time in data analysis, especially when you're dealing with bigger data sets, even like this one. So definitely get used to that. And yeah, thank you for listening and have a nice day.